Hi, my name is Mark Walker, and I'm the Editorial Director of the Fintech Times. Fintech Times founded in 2016 and centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas and opinions from around the fintech world. Today, we're going to be talking about cybercrime and specifically around contactless and mobile payments. And I'm really happy to have with me today, Stephen. Perhaps you can give us a quick introduction of yourself, your role, and what your company does.
Sure. Nice to meet you, Mark. So Stephen Burke is my name, founder and CEO of cyberriskaware.com. We help companies assess and mitigate human cyber risks. Some people tend to think we're a training company, but I often stand back from that and say, no, it's about helping companies help their staff defend the corporate network. Cyber criminals are actively targeting people to get to the systems, to get to the data, but to get to the money, which is what we're here to talk about today, particularly around fraud. And so really, when one thinks of cybercrime, often it's the actions of staff accidentally that cause these issues. And so we help raise awareness of best practice of how to avoid being tricked by cyber criminals, but also how to protect themselves at home as well as in the workplace. And given people working from home, it's exacerbated the need for staff to be helped. And we're delighted to be at the forefront of helping that digital transformation for companies to avoid costly security incidents that could damage reputation, but also lead to loss of funds. And that's what we do.
Wonderful. So, as I sort of said in the introduction, what we're kind of interested at the moment in the sort of the rise of contactless and mobile payments technology, which really has been sort of exaggerated during lockdown, obviously because of people wanting to use less cash and less interaction, and quite frankly having to stay at home and do a lot more online sort of shopping. What do you think, from your point of view, as that sort of increased the potential for fraud with that sort of contactless payments?
I think when anything is digitized, there's often a knee-jerk reaction to think that there's going to be more fraud involved. And I think that often comes down to fake websites and giving away credit card information and credit card fraud. But if you specifically look at contactless fraud, and the numbers in recent reports actually show that it's there, it's present, but it's not a huge problem out of the total number of online purchases that are made. And those are very interesting statistics that contactless fraud in 2019 was 3.3% of the overall total level of fraud. And 44% of all card transactions were contactless. So it's a very small fraction of the overall level of fraud itself is contactless. And I think the banks, the credit card information, they should be applauded for the extra controls and checks that they've put in place. PSD2 was actually another good thing, which for those that don't know, PSD2, when it came to contactless, they forced the re-entry of a PIN on a card, let's say, and it wasn't just about after 5 transactions, it actually, when it came to a particular amount, it forced the PIN to be re-entered by the user or the card holder. So it was really limiting the number of transactions or the amount of money that could be lost if a card was lost or stolen. That's predominantly how contactless is perpetrated, is lost or stolen cards. But you also then have the other aspect, which is card not present or CNP, remote purchases. That's the other level of fraud that can happen in relation to these cards.
Yeah. And obviously during the pandemic, we had a contactless increase, didn't we? Up to £45. And there has been quite a bit of talk about maybe that going up even higher. Mm-hmm. And obviously, a lot of people, that perhaps are not as close to the fintech industry as we are, sort of think, well, this means that basically if someone steals my card, they can go on a spending spree, and they don't even need to know my PIN number. They can go into every shop and spend £45 in every single shop, and they could, go into 10 shops. That's £450 they spent. Then they go into 1,000 shops. That's £4,000 odd pounds that they've spent. But as you mentioned before, obviously the banks have a system in place, don't they, for the number of contactless payments that can be used in succession. So that kind of alleviates a lot of that fear a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, so you're 100% right. It's £45 was the increase in the UK. It was €50 here in Ireland, and elsewhere around Europe, there definitely was an increase because people were spending more, and you didn't want to be touching consoles, and you didn't want to be taking money out of an ATM. It led to a lot of conversations around cash being dead. I, for one, I have to say, I can't really remember the last time I did take money out of an ATM. So whether that's just me or not, but I'm more reluctant than ever to touch money and actually get change off anybody. So definitely it has increased without a shadow of a doubt. Um, in terms of increasing limits, again, it's a convenience thing. And like anything in life, when you want something to be more convenient, there are risks associated with that. The card holders and the banks, they have stipulated 5 transactions of £45 or €50, after which time the user, the card holder, has to put in that PIN code. PSD2 was actually based on an amount. So let's say £230. So you could have, the thing is, no one transaction may be £50. Sometimes the store may have different limits on what's contactless or not. So the high-end shops may have 1,000. And this is where the disparities start to come in. And the reason for that is high-end shops have bigger purchase amounts, and therefore they want frictionless sales with those clients as well. So you have these different limits that sometimes are on the card, sometimes we're in the store. And that's how different levels of fraud can be perpetrated in different types of institutions. Ultimately, as I said, cards being lost or stolen can lead to the card being used freely for up to 5 transactions of that larger amount or reach the limit that PSD2 brought in. I read recent research that 2 security researchers were actually able to undermine the number of transactions. So the 5, they were able to circumvent that. It was a controlled breach of the control. It was based on risk management information that the card and the point of sale terminal was giving back. And they were able to intercept some of that and trick it into thinking that a PIN had been put in, and therefore it reset the counter back to 0. So there are edge cases, like there always will be. It's not going to be mass, it's not going to be mainstream, and I don't wish to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt in this, but it's not fallible. There can be breaches to this, and therefore there's always something more to be done. And I think when you look at banks and they're talking about human behavior analysis, even I read how someone is gripping a phone, that the security is trying to measure this. Now, I don't know how you measure the grip of someone on a phone. Like it's a hard object. I don't know how you're measuring someone's grip on it, but I read that. So they're trying to, I think they're even listening in to the background or the location. Is this normal where this person would be carrying out this transaction? Any anomalies like that, and they're actually going to put the brakes on the transaction and stop it. I think they've done a good job. Year on year, contactless fraud was flat between 2018 and 2019. The volume of fraudulent transactions was actually up 5% to 2.7 million, but the loss was 620 million, which was down 8%, which is showing you that better controls are coming in and preventing it. But of that total number of losses, 620 million, 1.18 million was contactless. So it's a fraction.
Yeah, it's a very small amount.
And it was flat year on year. So we have to contextualize this. So if we know the technology and the security controls are restricting the amount, well then by increasing the limits, I guess you're coming down to the number of fraudulent actions that happen, and therefore you would see a doubling or an increase of the amount lost if a larger amount can be lost in any single transaction.
As you said, obviously the banks have done quite a bit to sort of combat this and to work with it. I guess a lot of that potentially has come down to the fact that UK regulation at the moment seems to place quite a bit of the reimbursement of fraud at the sort of the hands of the banks. And obviously with yourself based in Ireland, is that generally sort of a concept in Europe that it seems to be the banks that are actually footing the bill for most of this fraud? and as a result, they're the ones that are most keen to solve the issue?
I think it's a very good debate to have. I think not all jurisdictions are the same. I think the UK, I think, is at the forefront of doing that. That said, I wouldn't say it's on all fraud. I think if the bank could demonstrate that the user was at fault, then they wouldn't necessarily pay out on that. But where the technology has been at fault and it was up to the bank to have detected that fraud and prevented it, they have paid out 98% of the time. So it's only 2% they haven't paid out on it. So they seem to have done the corporate decent thing. I know here in Ireland, one large banking institution, they suffered a lot with SMS and text messages going out that tricked a lot of people into clicking on links and giving away their username, passwords, and credentials to their banking details. They paid out on any loss of funds off the back of that, because I think they felt they hadn't done a good enough job of raising awareness of the type of threat, so smishing as it's known. And so they did, but not all other banking institutions did the same. And whether that was because they weren't the ones caught in the crosshairs and it wasn't their brand being used in the SMS text messages, or else they felt they had done a good enough job of raising awareness. So it really comes down to where they feel they sit in terms of their mitigation and awareness to the staff, to users even, to their customers, to be aware of the threats that can happen and actually how they can protect themselves. So it's no one size fits all, and there's no guarantee that the bank is going to pay it out. But that said, if it's their systems that are compromised and have led to an issue, and they're more likely to pay it.
Okay. So moving on a little bit from contactless, and you mentioned a little bit about it earlier, which is the card not present sort of service for online payments, etc. One of the other obviously effects of the pandemic, with a lot more sort of, shall we say, the older generation and maybe even the sort of more vulnerable people that are now at home, they will be turning a little bit more to online shopping with perhaps not the same level of understanding that perhaps a generation before them or that's followed them has had. Have you noticed that in the sort of levels of fraud and how the sort of phishing scams and everything else have been sort of developing?
Without a shadow of a doubt, that's the biggest growth area. Of all the fraud around payment card fraud, 76% is card not present. So a huge proportion of it. Like if you look at 76% is card not present, lost and stolen was 15%, and that's second. So it's an outlier. And so it shows that online shopping, the rise of doing that, the rise of email, the rise of email phishing attacks, that is, the SMS text messages, whether people are receiving online deliveries, SMS text messages say delivery coming, please click here, and whether it be you've booked a foreign travel and you need to get a refund on your airline ticket or your hotel reservation. It led to a 700% increase in fraud last year, all exacerbated because so many people were online. They were looking to get money back, or they were hopeful in trying to book a holiday away and knowing that they'd get a refund. So anything that comes back with a sensory wording that ties to what they have been doing, dare I say, it is an element of clickbait, and people will click, and because they don't want to lose money and they don't want to lose out on offers. When people are down in the dumps, and I think there's been a lot of talk about people and mental health, and people want to have a pick me up. And sometimes that comes down to an offer that's too good to be true, and people at a low ebb want to cheer themselves up and will click on an offer and try to avail of it. And that has led, as I said, to a 700% increase in fraud. We work closely with the Police Digital Security Centre and Action Fraud, and so we're fully aware of all these statistics. And that unfortunately has led to the loss of personal information, credit card information, username and passwords being given away as well, and other date of birth information and all that good stuff. So card not present is the big problem. Is it surprising? No, it's not, because even pre-pandemic, card not present online fraud was massive. That's what we're here as a company, is to help raise awareness to people at home and in the workplace, but that cyber criminals, fraudsters are targeting people to get money. And there's no amount of technology that's going to stop it. People need to stop and think before they click. All too often, we just rush into clicking on something. And, you, Mark, even, we've all done it. We know when we've taken a chance, and maybe we've got away with it, maybe we haven't gotten away with it. But now, as you talk about older people, are they aware of the risks? They're more trusting. They're more trustworthy. They tend not to think bad of people. They're also curious. And they may get a message from a sibling or a nephew or a niece that their account has been hacked. They don't know it, and they trust it by association. And so all of these things have given rise to the level of fraud to be increased. And therefore, whether it be the Police Digital Security Centre of Excellence or GCHQ, or campaigns by financial institutions to raise awareness of these fraudulent activities that are taking place, that's the best way to stop it from happening. It is an education piece. And I know that sounds a bit soft, but the effects of raising awareness in an effective way have dramatic effectiveness in terms of reducing the likelihood of fraud being perpetrated. Like we would see in our data sets that by training people and showing phishing tests, that we can reduce risk by up to 50% within 3 to 6 months of people clicking and giving away information. That goes to 92% within 9 to 12 months. And the whole point of this, Mark, is that people have a reliance that technology, or I have a laptop, or I have antivirus, that will stop that from happening. No, it doesn't stop it, unfortunately. Email defense is 66, 67% effective of stopping malicious emails from coming through. That means there's still 33% of bad emails going to get into somebody's inbox. And it only takes one email and one person to either be affected individually or to affect an entire organization, because other fraud, whether that from a corporate perspective, it has been fake invoices. Process this, we've changed the bank account, please wire the money into this account. Emails that have been made to look like the CEO sending to their staff to say COVID-19, working from home, or here's an online meeting. That was another big band of information that came out. Zoom meetings, GoToMeeting, Teams, fake links, all causing ransomware, or which encrypts all the data, and then people have to pay money to get that back. So it's been a myriad of issues that, unfortunately, people working from home, it has been exacerbated, because they're out of sight, they have no one to talk to, and there's been such a clamour to get people up and running and do their job, whilst do homeschooling and have their kids on the devices, install stuff for their kids, which has led to other infections. So, yeah, it's.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things, isn't it? When any major change happens or any major shift, not only is there obviously everyone having to deal with it themselves, but obviously then, as you say, there is the level of fraudsters that are looking at it as an opportunity to exploit a new potential revenue source for themselves.
No, absolutely, and you've also got fake charitable donations, again preying on people's goodwill.
Yeah. Well, and we've even seen fake COVID vaccinations and all this sort of stuff in the main news as well. So
and furlough schemes and government rebates on tax or grants for businesses. Anything that is sensory and emotive around money, people are more likely to start looking at it.
Yeah. So, I mean, just thinking on with that. So obviously, we can identify that there has caused a problem. Maybe let's start thinking about what maybe some of the solutions are. Obviously, awareness is one big one, which is what we're trying to do here, and what yourself is trying to do within your company as well. When it comes to sort of like mobile payments and that sort of stuff, obviously there's a lot more emphasis being put on the fact of like Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, which are kind of big tech companies that people trust and have in their hand and ready to go. Do they offer any protection if you're sort of paying online with those sort of services rather than a traditional bank card or anything like that?
Well, I don't know about you, Mark, but I'm more likely to know where my phone is than anything else. If I lose a bank card, I potentially may not notice it for a few hours. It could even be the following morning or the day. I was only laughing to my wife there recently. Was like, "Where's my bank card?" And she was looking in the car. She was looking in her coat. looking in the back pocket of our jeans. But the phone, we all know where the phone is straight away. So first off, you're going to know if you've lost your phone very, very quickly. And if we know lost and stolen is one of the bigger factors in loss of money, well then that'll sort that out. In terms of the security on the devices, I think Apple Pay is known to be one of the most secure out there, purely because it's on an Apple phone. They are known to be more secure than Android devices. Therefore, Google Pay and other things like that on Android phones, I would say, are less secure, but they're still quite secure. So just to caveat what I'm saying there, don't want to come and someone be berating me for saying that Android and Google Pay and all these things are insecure. They are secure. And that's owing to the encryption methodologies that have been employed. It's down to the near field communication, NFC as it's called, in terms of how that communicates. So you have to be very close to the point of sale terminal when you're putting your phone to pay and all that good stuff. Can that be intercepted? Like anything, yes, it can. There are man in the middle attacks that can happen. And like those two security researchers who looked at the contactless fraud that could be carried out, they were able to put a piece of technology in between to come up with a man in the middle type of attack. But again, that's not going to be mainstream. That is highly edge case. So when you're dealing with the vast numbers of transactions, so if 2.8 million is the number of payment card fraud attempts out of like huge numbers, what was the 829 billion spent in online payments. So it's a huge amount of money. And I think on the phone, I think it's more secure than your traditional bank card for the reasons I've just stated. And owing to the security of the devices and those companies, they are doing a good job, but they shouldn't rest on their laurels. They have to keep improving it and enhancing it. And I think identity fraud, biometrics is going to get rid of passwords. I think passwords need to go away. And I think the reason for that is people tend to use the same password across multiple accounts, even though they know they shouldn't. And I know I use a password manager, for example, that I don't even know any of my passwords. So that gets over that problem, but many people don't. And so biometrics gets over that because it's simpler, it's easier. It's either your eye, your retina, your face, or your fingerprint, right? So I think all those things combined tend to give a greater sense of security that if the card is being used on the phone, or sorry, the phone is the card, and it's not as easy to get onto the phone and it can't be used, then I think it's a secure environment going forward around that.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting one. And so thinking a little bit sort of even further sort of into the future as well, obviously we're hearing a lot about digital currencies, not necessarily talking about crypto or Bitcoins and that sort of stuff, but generally as currency becomes more and more digital, do you think, I'm assuming that obviously that's going to change the fraud profile, but do you think that makes it better or worse? Or what's your sort of take on that?
No, I wouldn't claim to be a subject matter expert on cryptocurrencies. All I can say is that crypto mining is one thing that, from a cybersecurity perspective, is something I would know about, and that's predominantly compromised devices being used to add additional processing power to mine cryptocurrencies in the wallets that people are targeting. And so that to me is a robotic network of connected devices that are collectively targeting something. But like anything that's digital, if you look at crypto wallets that I've just talked about and mining, if that's happening already to cryptocurrencies, when it comes to digital currencies, the fear would be that they too could become susceptible. And why I say this is with fintech and all the microservices, the new fintech companies that are coming out, you've got end-to-end solutions that are either wholly owned by one company or they're using a composite of services and elements from other companies. That is the supply chain. And it only takes one element of that to be circumvented, that somebody could be sitting there for months, years, just analyzing what's going on and doing absolutely nothing. And if you look at SolarWinds attack that happened based on a piece of software that's widely used from governments to private companies, somebody sitting there injecting a piece of malicious code that will enable them to gain access to all those corporate networks, to steal information, to get access to accounts, create fake accounts. Could that happen in the finance services end to end? And that's where my biggest concern is when it comes to digital currencies and crypto. Is the element, I was asked for my predictions. I normally ask for my predictions every year in terms of where is the cybersecurity risks going to come from. It was 2 years ago that I called out that my biggest concern will be microservices and something being compromised. That could well have already happened and nobody knows about it. Because stated aims of other nation states have said, in order to attack the US or the UK or other Western civilizations, they will target the economies to affect them. Whether that be the inability to process money, for clearing houses to spread money through the money markets, whether it be stock exchanges, bourses, all that. That's what they want to target to get at the economies. And my concern with the SolarWinds, it highlighted that systemic hurricanes, cyber hurricanes can happen. And could that happen in the fintech system tied to legacy banks and their infrastructure, and they're opening it up, and PSD2 is opening it up more and more? That is something that I do think about and I worry about.
I think it's a really interesting point that you make. And obviously, you know, there's a lot of people that will say, you know, certain cryptocurrencies, the technology is much more resilient and secure, but ultimately you still have a fallible human at one end, which is owning that. And so, even if you've got the most secure crypto wallet in the world, and someone, you know, sends you an email from a hacked account that seems to be your brother, your sister, and says, "Oh, can you send me some Bitcoin, or can you send me some cryptocurrency because I've got stuck in this problem?" And if the person falls for it, that's gonna happen anyway. That fraud's gonna happen because ultimately the human is the infallible link of any chain, really, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's just classic social engineering fraud. It's tricking somebody into doing something that they otherwise would not do. And the other side of this, Mark, is do you remember that fintech, some cryptocurrency chap? He unfortunately passed away, and he took the encryption keys with him, and nobody could gain access to the wallet. But that's another scenario that can come to play. Yes, it's secure by design, but there are weaknesses in that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of those. We actually did a whole webinar around crypto keys and all sorts of other stuff, but let's not go into that in this particular call. Just sort of like to sum up, as we're sort of running out of time now. What do you think is, you know, you mentioned a lot of people asking you for predictions, etc. What do you think 2021 is going to bring for us in relation to sort of like fraud? Will it build on what's happened in 2020, do you think? Or what's your sort of thought for this year?
I think my main predictions that I've shared recently is more of the same around targeting people. And I know it sounds somewhat self-serving that I'm in a business that's focusing on helping raise awareness and avoid people doing stuff, but I truly honestly believe that over $140 billion has been spent annually on technology solutions to prevent security incidents. Yet the number of incidents keeps increasing. Lots of data breaches, lots of financial losses. And when the claim, whether it's cyber insurance claim information, whether it be security incidents and the root cause analysis is conducted, in over 86% of those incidents, it's people. They've been specifically targeted, whether it be spear phishing, which is targeted phishing emails or text messages, or departmental messages being received. And again, one user clicking on a link, installing a free piece of software to make their lives easier. It has led to these incidents. And so therefore, a lot of security management teams, a lot of risk management companies are focusing on the human element now more than ever, because they're saying, hang on a second, we've invested all this in tech, yet we're still having these incidents. What do we need to do? We've got this gaping hole potentially in our network where we just haven't done a good enough job of helping our staff. And as a CISO, like I'm a former chief information security officer, the whole reason why I set up the company was I had that light bulb moment, said, hang on, we've invested in the tech, we've aligned to all the best practices, and yet I'm still dealing with issues. Are my peers suffering the same? Yes, they are. Therefore, I had to put my hands up and say, I haven't done a good enough job. And what could I do to make that better? And historically, that has been training people once a year to say I train my staff. Wholly ineffective. So by focusing on small and often, simulating what real attacks looks like, showing people that technology is not going to stop these things. This is what you should do if you receive an email or an SMS message or a WhatsApp message or whatever that is. Report it, and therefore we will avoid issues. That is the biggest area that I see next year, because COVID ain't going to go away. WHO announcements on how the vaccination program is not going to go away. People are going to start getting disgruntled that maybe they're not getting their vaccination as quickly as they want to. It's just human nature. Why are they getting it over me? Once we get past the certain levels of frontline staff and elderly in care homes, then you're going to start having this debate. I can see arguments coming down the road as to why are they getting it and why am I not getting it? And as a consequence, that's going to feed into messaging, websites, SMS messages, WhatsApp, social media, and that is just clickbait for people to be tricked because they're going to be nervous and concerned. And why? Because they want to get back to normal way of living, traveling, going away on their holidays. And maybe some people have already booked their holidays once they heard vaccinations were coming. Jab and go, as one airline said, that people will be saying, oh, I need that vaccination before I can go anywhere. So to me, that's the big area that's going to happen. Again, coupled with that is the fake online meetings and two-factor authentication, credentials, lost their credentials. I mentioned passwords will go away, biometrics. But for those that are still using username and passwords, they have to focus on two-factor authentication to stop the loss of their credentials. That'll stop 99% of somebody masquerading or pretending to be that person. If we tackle those things, that'll get a long way down the road to preventing these issues, raising awareness, multi-factor authentication, and then updating systems. That's the low-hanging fruit.
Wonderful. I think that's a really good point to sort of end on. And I think to sort of answer our original question when we were talking about, contactless and mobile payments, technology itself isn't fraudulent. It isn't the technology that's going to solve the problem. It's going to be, as you say, the awareness and talking to the humans, which are always the infallible bit at the end of the cycle, at the beginning of the cycle, effectively.
Absolutely. And I suppose the banks are going to be mindful of, they don't want to create a rod for their own backs by saying, okay, if fraud happens, I'm going to give you the money back. No, they're not. It's going to be, did you cause this or did we cause it? And you can be sure that if people did something that they shouldn't have done, well, there's going to have to be a sense of responsibility to that. And but that comes back to, if awareness has been sent over and people are aware of it, well, then they're in a different spot. So,
yeah. Fantastic. Well, we've come to the end of the time, Stephen. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We know your time is very valuable. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Mark. Lovely talking to you. Look forward to talking next time.